home, apartment, or in need for commercial office space, it makes sense to call Jones Properties first at 472-4000. Plus, you can get additional information by logging on to the website at www.jonesproperties.biz. Jones Properties is also looking to invest in properties. So if you have a property that you need to sell, call the professional team at Jones Properties first. They'll help you find the perfect property for whatever your needs. Call today, 472-4000. And don't forget to keep up with Jones Properties on Facebook.
So from Hong Kong, and Hong Kong for the last generation,
I'm BetaMotor.com, the Republican candidate for governor.
Have sexual relations
and I realize that this is something he is
We're not going to be able to solve our problems if we get distracted by sideshows and carnival barkers.
One Republican, one Democrat, and you discuss the issues that matter in today's local, state, national, and global politics. Hosted by Steve Hickson with co-hosts John Stanberry and Franklin Chansey. This is Backfire.
Hey, good morning, Clevelanders. Glad to be here. We've got a surprise for you this morning. Got several new guests in the studio. But before we do anything, we're going to pay tribute to 9/11 today. 2001, we had a tragic accident, or tragic terrorist incident that happened, and we want to pay just a moment of tribute to that.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the
All right, thank you. That was in 2001 that we're paying tribute to. It's the 9/11 attacks, what's known as, we had several planes hit these buildings in New York. It was a terrible, tragic accident. There was 19 terrorists that
It wasn't an accident. I know that's a slip of the tongue.
No, that's right. It wasn't an accident. But there was 19 terrorists that was involved in this plot that came to America, lived in America, trained to fly airliners and pulled this thing together. Do you think that 9/11 had anything to do with what's going on today?
I think it had to do with something that happened 700 or 800 years ago called Islam. They hate us.
Yep.
Their book says that they hate us. You either convert, you live in dimitude, as the Quran calls it, or they kill you. Those are your three options under the Quran. And they will get along with people as long as they're either not fundamentally active in the religion of Islam, or they're in the minority. You can look at Lebanon. Lebanon was a majority Christian nation. They got along with the Muslims because the Muslims were in the minority. As the Palestinian refugees piled in over the years, the population of the Muslims began to slowly creep up. Once they got over 50%, the whole nature of the country changed, and the whole nature of the relationship between the Muslims and the Christians changed, and the Christians were then persecuted. In 1 week in Egypt, about 2 weeks ago, you had 57 Coptic Christian churches destroyed, burned to the ground. The Coptic Pope in Egypt is in hiding. They had a monastery where the cross was broken off the dome of the monastery and an Al-Qaeda flag was erected, and 3 nuns were drugged through the streets in chains as political prisoners. And our president said zip about it.
Jeff Morlock, welcome to the studio this morning.
Thank you for inviting me, Steve.
We've got Adam Lowe here also this morning.
I've noticed that your green screen's a blue screen, and since I have a blue shirt on, I'm a floating head on the, for those of you who can tune into the web broadcast.
Anyway, John.
That's pretty cool, Adam, actually.
We're getting ready for Halloween around here.
Too.
We're getting ready for Halloween around here. Anyway, Jeff, you're right in the middle of these 2 Republicans this morning, and
they're both good friends.
You know, I don't know, Franklin Chancey, he really picked 2 good weeks to be gone, didn't he, John?
It might have been a rough week for him explaining this clown show that's going on.
It's, you know, I don't know where we're going to end up with everything, but I think Mr. Obama has really come to the end of his wire with this, with these stories and so forth. I think that he can't change his story from sentence to sentence and try to get by with this anymore. He's going to have to start laying the truth down there and having to stick to it, I believe.
I think his notions of certainty are much different than mine, whether it's with my kids or, you know, even with in business or out in the world. When I draw a line with somebody, I usually mean it. And although I tend to agree that backing off of his ultimatum was the right thing to do, I don't think he should ever issued it in the first place. And it's a little, you know, I was watching his speech last night, and you know, to be candid, I'm a lot of what he says is very laden with hypocrisy and even some irony. In the end of the day, I mean, a lot of what he appeals to human decency as the cause for the strike, and I'm actually one of those individuals that watched some of the videos of the gassing, and it's atrocious, it's horrible, and he appeals to that sense of human decency, but human decency's never been the rubric whereby we issue for war. It's usually been a combination of human decency versus our interests abroad, and I say that because there are governments out there who are starving children on a daily basis, and how many times have Palestinians aimed rockets at neighborhoods in Israel or in the West Bank? So I think that there's a sense that this is a lot more global, and if we get into the pattern of appealing to human decency for action, we're on a very, very slippery slope, and that was really the case he made last night. Well, what about the children? We can help these children, and that speaks to my moral compass so well, but when you get to the practical side of things, you really set yourself up for demise if you start using that as the measure whereby you take action.
The problem I had with the speech last night is he still came out and said that he did not need Congress's support.
Well, here's the real problem.
I cannot believe that the man has such an ego.
But Steve, outside of that, what did he actually say in the speech? He had a primetime speech where he asked all the networks to give him airtime, to come on to the TV and tell the American public that he needs to do something that he's not going to do, and he needs Congress to vote to support something that he's now asking them to delay the vote on. It was a speech about nothing.
Yes, you're right. But basically, I think the only thing he feels like he accomplished out of that speech last night was to tell the American public that he did not feel that he needed constitutional right to do this, but diplomatically he did it. Now then, that is I think that's what the whole speech was about last night.
No, the speech was actually about the fact that he was going to lose the vote.
Well,
it would have been a humiliating loss.
Yeah, sure.
And so here's the real problem. The easiest way to synopsize this for the American public is basically you have Obama and Kerry in the Shriners Clownmobile driving around in circles, and they've now run in the ditch, and Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, is backing the tow truck up to the ditch to pull them out. And the real downside consequence to that is we are not going to be the go-to country in the world to solve problems anymore. Russia and China are ascendant, and we are plunging.
Yeah.
Well, I think we can spend a lot of time discussing kind of the procedural aspect of what he's arguing with, whether or not he has authority and would have lost the vote in Congress. But to me, in his speech last night, the most potent point that I felt he was making was that human decency appeal, and
it was an emotional appeal, and it's true. Everything he said is true.
It's extremely ideological, though, too, because what you're saying is, well, based on my values, this is worth action. And there's a lot of other people out there who look and say, but these things are happening in other contexts, and you're saying nothing. You mentioned the Coptic Christian issue. A lot of people in our party feel that way about the unborn in this country. And so where does that line, when you start using that, that very ambiguous, unclear, gray area to justify something as precise as military action against another nation, I think you're just on a very, very slippery slope. Also, there was something that I think the most revealing line in his whole speech last night came when he was appealing to Democrats and Republicans. And he went to stereotypical extremes. For my Republican friends who value military action, join with me. And for my Democratic friends who value equality and human rights. And it was just really kind of biased.
What do you think about that? If you were a Republican in Congress and he goes on national TV, and even in that opportunity, he takes the opportunity to kick you, are you going to vote for it? And on top of that, are you going to, if you were leaning towards maybe supporting it, but he comes out and says it's going to be incredibly small and inconsequential, why would we commit to something incredibly small and inconsequential?
There was no outcome. I mean, there was.
Well,
on
top of that, the Russian thing,
there.
Steve, how are you going to get the weapons? Who's going to go get them? Because they're in the middle of a civil war.
Yeah.
So you think that if he said no boots on the ground, somebody's going to have to put boots on the ground to go in there and secure them. The Russians are masterfully playing this game. Oh. They have been pushed out of the Middle East for over 40 years. We've created a vacuum. This president wanted us to be less important. We are. The Russians are now rushing in to fill that vacuum. And what they're doing here, all this is about, if you'll notice, what they did is they said, sure, we'll do this. So they said, great, let's have a meeting of the Security Council. About an hour before the meeting, the Russians pull the rug out from under the meeting and say, nope, we're not showing up. By the way, we also want you to take any military action off the table. What does that do? It guarantees that Syria will remain in Assad's control, which is all Russia cares about, because they've got a port there. They want to put the pipeline through to get their gas out to the ocean. That's all this is about, is maintaining Assad in control. And the president, who just a few weeks ago stated Assad had to go, has basically apparently now agreed to the Russian proposal that he stays permanently.
It's over a pipeline. A lot of this is over a pipeline over there.
They need they have no port to the ocean. They need a pipeline.
Now then, we have a pipeline. We won't take it.
Right. We won't let them build it.
Let me make a couple of points here, if I could.
Please do.
I'm certainly not here to defend Obama, but it's just interesting to me, and my wife and I have talked about this. What happened over there when they gassed those people and those children was a horrendous thing. It was horrendous. But it's just interesting to us that if they'd gone in there and dropped a bomb on them, or gone in there with soldiers and shot them, that's just another day in the war. But if they got gassed, all of a sudden it's an horrendous thing, which it is. But is it not horrendous too if they'd gone in there and dropped a bomb on them? Is that not horrendous?
Well, don't you think don't you think they'd put all their private civilians right where our targets would have been?
They've already been moving the military people out into. Jeff's absolutely right, and that's part of the hypocrisy that we're talking about. He's killed over 100,000 people total. The president says he killed 1,400 in the gas attacks. Most of Europe says it was 300, 400, 500. Now, don't get me wrong, it's horrible. But, for example, as a nation, when you talk about our history, in Rwanda, in a 100-day period, they killed 800,000 people with machetes. Yeah. You don't think the pictures of that would have been horrendous? We didn't go into Rwanda. I've
got dear friends who lived in and have family in the Republic of the Congo, and some of the stories that they've told over the years, equate if not exceed what justification I've seen for Syria, and then I think what Mr. Morlock's noting is right on. This happens, death and military might and regimes slaughtering people and genocide is happening everywhere, but we focus our attentions here. And for somebody like me that really, I'm one of those that look for a good justification for anything, particularly when it's something like going in for a military strike. And I really felt, and this is just really being honest, I felt like when I was watching the speech last night, it was like when that guy showed up at my house selling a vacuum, but he didn't want to tell me he was selling me a vacuum. He wanted to tell me he was selling me a cleaning service, and he wanted to tell me about how dirty my house was by vacuuming right there where my kids come in and out of the door. I'm well aware of how dirty that spot is, but he's you're sitting there and you're about 10 minutes into the conversation, and finally you look at the guy and you say, what are you trying to sell me here? What's really your purpose? What's your motive with being here at my door? And I felt like that last night with the president's speech. I'm going, what's your point? What's your end game here? What are you trying to do? Now, I read an op-ed yesterday that was talking about rescuing his legacy and things like that, and I'm not so certain I'm ready to jump on the bandwagon of a Democrat using military action to rescue their legacy. I don't think that's typically the legacy they live for, but I still am kind of left in this uneasy place of what's really going on here. I think we know what's going on in Syria and we know what's going on in Washington, but we really don't know what's going on in the middle.
I think you got somebody full of BS that it's all called up to them right now, and I think that the BS is fixing to come to an end. They go to the G20 summit over there. Obama has several days that he can try to rally some support for what he's wanting to do. He virtually had the French, and that was about it, right, John?
Well, the only reason the French go in, if you look back on history, Syria was a former French colony. And the only places the French will actually really invest anything is what they consider property used to be theirs. So the French are acting out of nationalistic pride, not out of anything really significant. Great Britain refusing to go in with us, I think, is the first time they've refused a request from America in something like since the War of 1812. They've always been our partner. And what's really frustrating is here's Obama, who as a U.S. Senator derided President Bush, who had 49 other countries supporting the invasion, not just supporting it verbally, but actually participating in it. And he said that wasn't good enough. He has, we'll count the French as half of a nation. He has half of one nation supporting him. And somehow that's okay.
Are you suggesting that at any given moment France could be in a civil war themselves and lose again?
Well, I will tell you that France, because of the immigration from Algiers, is actually 40% Muslim at this point. And that when we looked at the Iraq invasion and you said, oh, France doesn't support us, they had some real reasons demographically inside their own borders not to support us.
Do you think that the Muslims have started showing up? I'm trying to think of the word I want to say, but I see the mosques being built all over the United States now. Mm-hmm. I used to never hear anything about the Muslims here in America. I'm sure New York and Washington, Detroit is where the largest population is. But it seems like there's just a big, in Nashville they were building a mosque and had a big issue over there.
Murfreesboro.
The scariest thing.
What did I say?
You said Nashville.
Murfreesboro. That's correct.
The scariest thing is that the Saudi Arabians are funding chairs of excellence in universities all across the country, and that influences the way our kids are taught. And personally, I believe the public education and higher education is very skewed to the left, and I think they enjoy the indoctrination. We had a professor just last week at MSU up in, I guess, Michigan, that went in and said all Republicans were white people who were racist and had stolen everything they had from all the other people of color. And I mean, it was recorded. Now, he's been put on administrative leave, but you have indoctrination going on, and it's concerning when you see the Saudi family, which is the Wahhabi sect, which is what most of the terrorists are, funding chairs of excellence all across this country.
Well, it seems like it's it's growing in our country at a tremendous rate right now. So, that's a little scary to me.
Well, let me tell you one other thing that will tell you a little bit about this too. I don't like the web a whole lot. I don't like people talking anonymously online. So I have a prejudice against that anyway, but there is a company called Outbrain, and apparently they have something to do with the way your web works, and they have modules all over the world.
They're not tied into NSA, are they?
Well, I'm sure they are, but it registers what people read. Guess what people are reading around the world? 8-to-1 reading of Miley Cyrus stories versus Syria stories. So you've got something going on in the world. One, you've got genocide. Two, you've got things that could impact the entire world's economy. And by an 8-to-1 margin, people are reading about Miley Cyrus rather than Syria.
Now, that's actually funny because it came out yesterday that Jimmy Kimmel, a popular comedian, last week had put on the internet a fake YouTube video of the dance Miley Cyrus was doing, the twerking thing, and it resulted in an accident with a girl catching herself on fire, and it went viral to the tune that news stations across the nation were doing segments, like 5-10 minute segments on the dangers of twerking and showing this video and saying that reporting that this girl was making a video for her boyfriend, when in all reality Jimmy Kimmel comes on his show 2 nights ago and reveals that they fabricated this video. They put it on the internet just to see how viral it went. News stories were reporting it as news, and Jimmy Kimmel ends his segment by saying, well, at least there's nothing going on in Syria.
Right. Well, let me tell you one other scary fact about that, because this thing registers screen pages all across the world. Miley Cyrus was the highest screen page read in England, Australia, France, Germany, and every other nation in their analysis except Israel and Russia. Now, Israel, you understand, because they're going to get bombed. If we do something, there's a good chance Israel will be retaliated against.
And Russia's just Bieber fans.
Well, I mean, my point is we're sitting around here as a nation going, do, everything will always be okay. No one will ever hurt us. As long as I can get down to the corner store and buy my Big Mac, life is good.
That's because Miley Cyrus is swinging on a ball naked.
I saw that yesterday, and it was...
and everybody wanted to see that, so...
pretty much pornography.
I mean, this is that's amazing. How old is she now?
20.
20.
Let me make a couple of points, if I may. First of all these groups that are fighting in Syria, the regime and all the rebel groups, I think they all have one thing in common. They all hate the U.S. Right. Whoever wins ends up is going to hate the U.S. And the second thing, I want to comment a little bit about the Muslims. I think we need to be careful about condemning Muslims in general. It's my belief that
there's some good ones.
There's some good Muslims out there, a lot of good Muslims, and they just want to make a living for their family just like we do and live a quiet, peaceful life. They're not interested in all this jihad stuff. And I think we have to be very careful about condemning the Islam religion in general.
In other words, we don't need to do any racial profiling here.
We don't need to do any racial profiling. We've been through these. You can read about some extreme right-wing Christian groups in this country, and they're.
And how many terrorist acts have they done? How many thousands of people have they killed?
I'm not saying they've. I'm just saying be careful.
Well, here's the problem. When a guy robs a bank and the description goes out on the air, that's a profile.
Yeah.
So if you say, well, we shouldn't do any racial profiling, when all of the terrorists that have done stuff to us have been between the ages of 19 and 30, and they've all been Islam converts or believers, how do you look for a future terrorist if you can't put that profile out?
I don't disagree with that.
Well, that's racial profiling.
What about the military guy that turned and...
Oh, that was workplace violence. Just because he yelled Allah Akbar while he shot people and has proclaimed it all through the trial that he did it, to honor Allah and Islam, that doesn't mean he was a terrorist.
Well, and the sad part of that is the victims' families don't get the benefits if
they don't get
anything.
declared
a terrorist act.
Anyway, Jeff, I think I understand what you're saying. That we need to be careful because there are some good Muslims, but we probably need to be really careful because there's a lot of bad ones.
That's right.
Well, here's the problem: you can point out all kinds of things in history where Christians have done horrible things. You go back to the Inquisition. You go to the Crusades. I'll make an argument for you there. I'm not as upset about the Crusades because Israel and Jerusalem are significant if you really study any of the world's religions. But you can point out plenty of atrocities that Christians have done. But here's the problem with it. The people that did that in the name of Christianity were actually acting in violation of the teachings of Christianity. So if the world became a more Christian place, the world would become a better place. The terrorists who have done atrocities in the name of Islam have been doing it in keeping with the teachings of Islam and the leaders of Islam. So if the world became a more Muslim place, the world will become a more violent, repressed place. You have a child bride, I think, in one of the African countries who died from internal injuries after her wedding night was taken care of. She's 8 years old and was married off to a 30-year-old man. And the sex killed her from internal injuries. That's Muslim. That's Islam. That's in the Quran. So this idea that one culture is not superior to another culture is relativism, and it's killing the entire world if we let it go.
All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be back in a few minutes. We've got several things to talk about when we come back, a lot of them locally.
You're listening to Backfire with Steve Hickson. We'll be right back after this.
You are listening to WOOP-LP, Cleveland, Tennessee. WOOP FM is a broadcasting service of the Traditional Music Resource Center, and we play America's original music.
Check into cash. Turn your car into cash at Check Into Cash. Get a title loan fast and a lot more cash. Turn your car into cash at Check Into Cash. Go to checkintocash.com right now and find out what your car is worth. Our expert appraisers are standing by. You get the most money from Check Into Cash. Call 877-262-CASH. Turn your car into cash at Check Into Cash.
Get on down, Check Into Cash. When you buy or sell or pawn,
you can't go wrong at U.S. Money Shops.
When money's tight, you'll be alright.
'Cause relief's inside at U.S. Money Shops.
Hey, Glenn here from U.S. Money Shops. If you're looking for extra cash, whether it's $50, $500, or even $50,000, then U.S. Money Shops just may be the place for you. We're a pawn shop like no other. Buy, sell, pawn, we do it all.
Pawn with us, we'll earn your trust.